They say fate is written in the stars, but sometimes it is written in a ledger by a powerful man with a cold heart. When Lydia Hastings lost her job, her home, and her reputation in a single afternoon, she thought it was just a run of terrible luck. She sought shelter from a storm beneath an ancient oak tree, trembling and destitute. But when the Duke of Ashbourne rode out to find her, he didn't ask for her name. He already knew it. Because he wasn't her savior. He was the architect of her ruin. Or so she thought. The rain in 1887 did not wash things clean. It merely turned the soot of London and the mud of the countryside into a thick, inescapable paste. Lydia Hastings ran until her lungs burned like coals in a furnace. The hem of her governess dress, once a respectable grey wool, was now heavy with the filth of the road. She clutched a small, pathetic carpet bag to her chest, the sum total of 22 years of life. Behind her, the iron gates of Halloway Manor were likely being bolted shut. She could still hear the shrill, triumphant voice of Mrs. Halloway, ringing in her ears, louder than the thunder rolling over the Derbyshire hills. "Thief! I always knew you had the look of a beggar about you, Miss Hastings. A silver comb does not simply walk out of a vanity drawer." Lydia hadn't taken the comb. She knew exactly who had Mr. Halloway's wayward son, Geoffrey, who had gambling debts in the village and a penchant for pawning his mother's trinkets. But when the comb was found mysteriously tucked into Lydia's apron pocket during the morning inspection, the truth didn't matter. The narrative did. Geoffrey smirked from the doorway. Mrs. Halloway screamed, and Lydia was cast out without a reference, without her wages, and without a future. Now the sky was tearing itself open. The road ahead was desolate. To the left lay the village of Kensgrove, 5 miles away, too far to walk in this deluge. To the right lay the vast, intimidating expanse of the Ashbourne estate. The locals whispered about Ashbourne. They said the Duke who lived there was a recluse, a man who had spent too much time in the colonies and returned with a heart made of ironwood. Lightning forked, striking the ground near the ridge, and the horse-drawn cart Lydia had hoped to flag down rattled past her, the driver ignoring her frantic wave. She was invisible. She was nothing. "Please," she whispered to the wind, shivering violently. "Just somewhere dry." As if the heavens were mocking her, the rain intensified to hail. Desperate Lydia spotted the landmark the villagers called the Sentinel. It was a massive ancient oak tree standing alone on a rise of land that marked the border of the Duke's property. Its branches were thick and gnarled, the canopy so dense it offered the only sanctuary for miles. Lydia scrambled up the muddy embankment, slipping twice, her hands scraping against sharp stones. She threw herself beneath the canopy of the old oak. It was darker here, but dry. She collapsed against the rough bark, sliding down until she hit the earth, hugging her knees to her chest. She closed her eyes, trying to stop the tears. If she didn't find work by tomorrow, she would be in the workhouse. But without a reference from the Halloways, no respectable house would take her. It was a death sentence. "It feels orchestrated," she muttered, the thought bubbling up from her subconscious. "It all happened so fast." Just then a sound cut through the roar of the wind. Clip-clop, clip-clop. It was the heavy rhythmic strike of hooves on wet earth. Not a panic-stricken carriage horse, but a steady, disciplined mount. Lydia pressed herself deeper into the shadows of the tree trunk. A rider appeared over the ridge. He was riding a massive black Frisian, a beast that looked more like a creature of war than a gentleman's mount. The rider wore a long oilskin duster coat and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low. He didn't ride past. He pulled the reins, bringing the massive horse to a halt directly in front of the oak tree. The horse snorted steam rising from its nostrils. The man sat there for a moment, motionless, looking at the tree, looking at her. Lydia held her breath. She was trespassing. If this was the Duke's gamekeeper, he might set dogs on her. The man dismounted. He was tall, imposingly so. He moved with a predator's grace, ignoring the rain that instantly hammered his shoulders. He walked into the dry circle beneath the oak. Lydia scrambled to stand her back, pressing against the wood. "I apologize, sir. I am leaving. I only sought shelter from the hail. I am no vagrant, I assure you." The man took off his hat. A flash of lightning illuminated his face. He was strikingly handsome, but in a severe, terrifying way. High cheekbones, a jaw set like granite, and eyes the color of a stormy sea, grey and turbulent. He looked to be in his early 30s, but his eyes held the weariness of a man of 60. He didn't look at her ragged dress. He didn't look at the mud on her face. He looked directly into her eyes. "You are late," he said. His voice was a deep baritone, smooth as velvet, but cold as ice. Lydia blinked, confused. I beg your pardon." "I expected you at the Oak 10 minutes ago, Miss Hastings," the man said calmly. Lydia's blood ran cold. She gripped her bag tighter. "You know my name. Who are you?" The man reached into his coat pocket. Lydia flinched, expecting a weapon. Instead, he pulled out a gold pocket watch, clicked it open, glanced at it, and snapped it shut. "My name is Arthur Sterling," he said, "the Duke of Ashbourne, and you, Lydia, are exactly where I intended you to be." The wind howled outside the canopy, but inside the circle of the oak, the silence was deafening. "You intended," Lydia repeated, her voice trembling. "Your Grace." "I don't understand. I was dismissed from Halloway Manor scarcely 2 hours ago. It was a disaster, an accident. How could you possibly know?" Arthur Sterling, the Duke of Ashbourne, did not smile. He simply watched her, studying her face, as if checking for cracks in a porcelain vase. "There are no accidents, Miss Hastings, only variables I have not yet accounted for. And in your case, I accounted for everything, even Geoffrey Halloway's gambling debts." Lydia's jaw dropped. "Geoffrey? What do you know of him?" "I know that he owes £300 to a lender in London. I know he stole his mother's silver comb to pay the interest. And I know that when his mother discovered it missing, he needed a scapegoat." The Duke took a step closer. "I also know that you are the only governess in the county with the education of a lady but the poverty of a pauper. You were the perfect victim." Lydia felt a flush of anger override her fear. "You speak of my ruin as if it were a mathematics problem. If you knew Geoffrey stole it, why didn't you stop it? Why didn't you send word? Because—" Arthur said, his eyes darkening. "I needed you desperate. I needed you here under this tree with nowhere else to turn." He extended a gloved hand toward her. "Come. My carriage is waiting just beyond the ridge. My horse will follow." "I am not going anywhere with you," Lydia snapped, backing away until the rough bark scraped her shoulder blades. "You sound like a madman. You let me lose my livelihood just to meet me, to hire you," Arthur corrected, "for a position that requires total isolation from your previous life. If you had a reference, if you had options, you would never accept what I am about to offer. You had to be burned to the ground so that I could build you back up." Lydia looked at his hand. It was a steady hand, leather-clad and strong. She looked out at the storm, She had 3 shillings in her pocket. She had no family. Her parents had died of influenza 3 years prior, leaving her with nothing but debts. She was effectively a ghost. "What is the position?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "My wife," Arthur said. The thunder clapped simultaneously, drowning out Lydia's gasp. "Your wife?" "In name," Arthur clarified quickly, though his tone remained businesslike. "I require a duchess. Specifically, I require a duchess who is intelligent, desperate, and who has no family to ask difficult questions. You fit the criteria perfectly." "This is absurd." "Is it?" Arthur turned his head slightly, listening to the rain. "The workhouse in Kensgrove is overflowing with typhus. If you walk there, you will likely die within the month. If you come with me, you will have warmth, food, protection, and eventually a pension that will keep you wealthy for the rest of your days. All you have to do is play a part." Lydia looked at him. He was beautiful in a terrifying way. But there was something else in his eyes. Not cruelty exactly, but a deep, driving urgency. A pain he was hiding behind the arrogance. "Why me?" she asked. "Surely there are countless debutantes in London, dying to catch a duke." "I do not need a debutante who gossips with her mother," Arthur said sharply. "I need an accomplice, and based on the way you stood up to Mrs. Halloway when she inspected your room, yes, I have a report on that. 2, you possess a spine. I need steel, Miss Hastings, not silk." He waited. He didn't plead. He simply offered the choice, the storm or the devil. Lydia looked at her soaked boots. She thought of the cold, rat-infested dormitory of the workhouse. She thought of the injustice of being called a thief. She looked up and took his hand. "I am not doing this for you, Your Grace. I am doing this because I refuse to die in the mud." "An excellent motivation," Arthur said, his fingers closing around hers. His grip was warm. "Survival is the only honest virtue left." He led her out from the shelter of the old oak. The rain hammered them immediately, but Arthur pulled her close, shielding her with his heavy oilskin coat as they walked toward the ridge. As they crested the hill, a black carriage with the crest of Ashbourne, a wolf rampant, came into view. A footman, a man with a scarred face named Silas, jumped down to open the door. Lydia climbed inside. The interior was lined with crushed velvet and smelled of tobacco and cedar. It was a different world. Arthur climbed in opposite her. He tapped the roof, and the carriage lurched forward. "Dry yourself," he said, tossing her a clean linen towel from a compartment. "We have a long drive, and before we arrive at Ashbourne Hall, there is something you must know. The reason I need a wife." Lydia dabbed her wet face. "And what is that?" Arthur leaned forward, the shadows of the carriage dancing across his face. "My uncle Lord Timothy Sterling is trying to have me declared insane to seize the estate. He claims I am unfit because I have not produced an heir, and I live in isolation. By law, if I am married, his claim weakens. If I have a duchess, I am a stable pillar of society." "So I am a shield," Lydia realized. "You are a fortress," Arthur corrected. "But be warned, Lydia. My uncle is not the only danger at Ashbourne Hall. The walls have ears, and the servants are paid for their secrets. From this moment on, you must love me. You must adore me. If anyone suspects this is an arrangement, we both lose everything." Lydia looked out the window. The old oak was fading into the distance, a dark silhouette against the grey sky. She felt a strange shiver that had nothing to do with the cold. "I can act, Your Grace," she said softly. "But tell me, if you orchestrated my ruin to get me here, How do I know you won't orchestrate my death when you are done with me?" Arthur's eyes locked onto hers. For a second, the mask slipped, and she saw a flash of genuine raw intensity. "Because," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper, "you are the only person in this carriage who isn't already dead inside." The carriage turned through the massive iron gates of Ashbourne Hall. The estate was vast, dark, and imposing, with stone gargoyles leering down from the turrets. As they approached the main door, Lydia saw a figure standing on the steps holding a lantern. It was a woman, tall and severe, dressed in black. "Who is that?" Lydia asked. Arthur stiffened. "That is my aunt, Lady Beatrice. Do not let her smile fool you. She is the one who suggested to Mrs. Halloway that she check your apron for the comb." Lydia gasped, turning to him. "Your aunt? She helped you frame me." "No," Arthur said grimly. "She tried to destroy you so you would be sent to prison, removing you as a candidate. She knows I was watching you. She wants me alone. She wants me vulnerable." He reached across and took Lydia's hand again, bringing it to his lips in a mockery of a romantic gesture, though his eyes were alert and dangerous. "Showtime, my love." The great oak doors of Ashbourne Hall groaned open, revealing a cavernous entry hall that smelled of beeswax old stone and something faintly metallic like dried blood or rusted iron. The interior was magnificent, but devoid of warmth. Shadows clung to the high corners of the vaulted ceiling, and the grand staircase loomed like the backbone of a prehistoric beast. Lady Beatrice stood at the threshold, her lantern casting long, dancing shadows against the limestone walls. Up close, she was even more terrifying than she had appeared from the carriage. She was a woman of perhaps 50, with skin pulled tight over sharp bones and eyes that were black beads of calculation. "Arthur," she purred, her voice dripping with false concern. "We did not expect you back until the morrow. And you have brought a stray." Her gaze raked over Lydia, lingering on the mud-splattered hem of her dress. It was a look designed to make Lydia feel like an insect that had crawled onto a pristine tablecloth. Arthur stepped forward, positioning himself slightly in front of Lydia. It was a subtle move, a barrier of tweed and broad shoulders. "Not a stray, Aunt Beatrice. A savior. This is Miss Lydia Hastings, my betrothed." The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bones. Beatrice's smile did not waver, but the lantern in her hand trembled ever so slightly. "Betrothed, surely you jest, nephew. You have been gone 3 hours. One does not find a duchess in a thunderstorm." "I found her precisely where I left her heart," Arthur said smoothly, reciting a line that sounded rehearsed, yet was delivered with convincing gravity. "Lydia and I have been corresponding for months. Today I simply decided I could wait no longer." He turned to the footman. "Silas. Silas, have the maids prepare the blue suite for Miss Hastings. Draw a hot bath, and burn these clothes." He gestured to Lydia's ruined dress. "Have the seamstress bring the trunk I ordered from Paris last week." Lydia kept her face impassive, though her mind was racing. Paris last week? He truly had planned every second of this. "The blue suite," Beatrice interrupted, her voice sharpening. "That is next to your chambers, Arthur. Surely the guest wing would be more appropriate until the nuptials are formalized." "She is not a guest," Arthur said, his voice dropping to that dangerous low register Lydia had heard under the oak tree. "She is the mistress of this house. She will sleep where she is safest. And considering the accidents that tend to happen in the guest wing, loose floorboards, falling masonry, I prefer her close to me." Beatrice's eyes narrowed. The subtext was a declared war. She knew that he knew. "As you wish," Beatrice said, finally stepping aside. Your Uncle Timothy is in the library. He will be fascinated to meet her. Arthur placed a hand on the small of Lydia's back. The heat of his palm burned through her damp clothes. Come, my love. Let us get you warm. As they ascended the grand staircase, Lydia felt the weight of Beatrice's stare boring into her spine. She leaned into Arthur, whispering, so only he could hear. She hates me already. And she has not even heard me speak. She hates you because you are breathing, Arthur muttered back, his eyes fixed on the landing. And because you are the obstacle between her and the Ashbourne fortune. Hold your head up. You are a Hastings. I checked your lineage. Your grandfather was a decorated colonel. Channel him. Lydia straightened her spine. She was terrified, yes, but she was also angry. Angry at the Halloways, angry at the rain, and angry at these rich vultures who played with lives like chess pieces. They reached the top of the stairs and turned down a long velvet runner corridor. Arthur opened a door, revealing a bedroom that was larger than the entire cottage Lydia had grown up in. A fire was already roaring in the hearth. Silas is efficient, Arthur noted, closing the door and locking it. The moment the lock clicked, the Duke collapsed. It wasn't a faint, but a sudden release of tension. He sagged against the door, his hand going to his forehead, his breathing ragged. The imperious titan of the entryway was gone, replaced by a man who looked haunted. Are you unwell? Lydia asked, stepping toward him instinctively. Arthur waved her off. Just tired. The air in this house is poisonous, Lydia. Not literally, perhaps, but it chokes the life out of you. He straightened up, forcing the mask back into place. You have an hour before dinner. The clothes in the wardrobe will fit you. I had them tailored to the measurements provided by your previous employer's seamstress, bribed, of course. Lydia walked to the wardrobe and opened it. Inside hung gowns of silk velvet and satin, emerald greens, deep blues wines. No grey. No governess wool. Why? She asked, turning to him. Why go to such lengths? You could have hired an actress from London. Arthur walked to the window, staring out at the rain-lashed grounds. Because an actress acts for money, you act for survival. And there is something else. He turned to face her. The oak tree. Lydia paused, her hand resting on green velvet. What about it? My father planted that oak the day I was born, Arthur said quietly, and he died beneath it when I was 10. My Uncle Timothy claims it was a riding accident. I know it was not. I saw the cut on the saddle strap. Lydia covered her mouth. Murder, assassination, Arthur corrected, for the title. But they missed me. I was sent away to boarding school, then the military, then the colonies. I survived, and I vowed that I would not return until I was strong enough to crush them. I chose the oak for our meeting because it is the only place on this estate that feels honest. It is a place of death, yes, but also a place of roots. I needed to see if you could stand beneath the weight of that history and not break. And, Lydia asked. You stood, Arthur said. You were terrified, but you stood. Dinner was a battlefield served on fine china. The dining room was dimly lit, the long mahogany table stretching out like a coffin lid. At one end sat Arthur, dressed now in formal evening wear, looking every inch the aristocrat. At the other sat Lydia, wearing the emerald silk gown Arthur had provided. It fit her perfectly, hugging her waist and accentuating the fiery color of her hair. On the long sides sat the vultures. Lady Beatrice was picking at her pheasant. Opposite her sat Lord Timothy Stirling. He was a rotund man, with a red face and watery blue eyes that darted around the room like nervous flies. He was a lawyer by trade, and he wore his profession like a weapon. So, Timothy began slicing his meat with unnecessary aggression. Miss Hastings, a whirlwind romance. How novel. Tell me, where did you say your family hails from? Lydia took a sip of wine, buying herself a second. She knew this was a deposition, not a conversation. My father was Colonel John Hastings of the 4th Light Dragoons. My mother was a cleric's daughter from York. Timothy paused. Hastings, I recall a Hastings, died penniless, didn't he? Bad investments in the wool trade. He died a man of honor, Lydia said, coolly, setting her glass down. Which is a currency that seems rare in certain circles these days. Arthur hid a smile behind his napkin. Timothy's eyes narrowed. Sharp tongue. Arthur usually prefers his women silent or paid for by the hour. Uncle, Arthur warned, his voice a low rumble. I merely speak the truth. Timothy laughed, a wet, unpleasant sound. We are all family here. We must be honest. You are a governess, are you not? Miss Hastings, I heard a rumor from the village. Dismissed from Halloway Manor this very afternoon for theft. Lydia's heart hammered against her ribs. They knew. Of course they knew. Beatrice had probably sent a runner to the Halloways the moment Lydia arrived. I was dismissed, Lydia said, her voice steady though her hands trembled beneath the table. Because I refused to be silent when a crime was committed. I did not take the silver comb, but I know who did. And I imagine, Lord Timothy, that you know a thing or two about being accused of things you did not do, or perhaps things you did do but covered up with legal jargon. Timothy slammed his knife down. How dare you? I dare because I am the future Duchess of Ashbourne, Lydia declared, channeling every ounce of anger she had felt in the rain. And I will not be interrogated over soup. Arthur cleared his throat. She has you there, uncle. She is a gold digger, Beatrice hissed, abandoning her pretense. Arthur, look at her. She is a commoner. She is here for the estate. You are not well. You are not thinking clearly. This is another one of your episodes. Episodes? Lydia asked, looking at Arthur. Arthur's face had gone pale. A sheen of sweat appeared on his brow. His hand, resting on the table, began to tremor violently. The heat, Arthur gasped, loosening his cravat. It is very hot in here. See, Timothy pointed a fork at him. He is unstable. The madness is setting in again. The colonies rot the brain, they say. Fever. Delirium. Arthur stood up, knocking his chair back. He swayed, gripping the table for support. His eyes were wide, the pupils dilated. I need air. Sit down, Arthur, Timothy commanded, his voice taking on a gleeful authority. You are in no state to leave. We must call Dr. Arris. Beatrice, ring the bell. Lydia saw the trap snapping shut. They were trying to provoke a breakdown in front of a witnesser. If she testified he was mad, or if she stood by and did nothing, they would have him committed. Lydia stood up, moving swiftly to Arthur's side. She didn't panic. She grabbed his trembling hand and squeezed it hard enough to hurt. He does not need a doctor, Lydia announced, her voice ringing through the hall. He needs his fiancée. The Duke suffers from malaria recurrences. He told me of them in his letters. It is not madness, Lord Timothy. It is a fever, and I know exactly how to treat it. She wrapped her arm around Arthur's waist, taking his weight. He was heavy, his body burning up. Come, Arthur, she whispered. Lean on me. Arthur looked down at her, his eyes unfocused, but he nodded. Lydia. I have you, she said. She led him out of the dining room, leaving Beatrice and Timothy staring in stunned silence. They had expected a governess who would crumble. They got a lioness. Lydia practically dragged Arthur into the library, which was closer than the bedroom. She kicked the door shut and guided him to a leather sofa. Arthur, look at me. He was breathing in shallow gasps. Water. Lydia rushed to the sidebar, pouring a glass of water from a crystal decanter. She brought it to his lips. He drank greedily. Is it malaria? She asked, wiping his brow with her sleeve. No. Arthur rasped, his eyes clearing slightly. I have never had malaria. Lydia froze. Then what is this? Arthur gripped her wrist. It happens after I eat. Sometimes, not always. A dizziness, a loss of control. Lydia looked at the empty glass in her hand. Then she looked back at the dining room door. Her mind, sharpened by years of teaching logic and science to reluctant children, connected the dots. Timothy mentioned Dr. Aris, Lydia said. Who is he? The family physician, Arthur mumbled, sitting up. He treats my uncle for gout. He prepares my tonics. Lydia stood up and walked to the massive desk in the center of the room. She began opening drawers, ignoring Arthur's weak protest. What are you doing? I'm looking for proof, Lydia said. You aren't mad, Arthur. And you aren't sick. You are being poisoned. Arthur struggled to his feet. Poisoned by whom? By the people who want you declared insane, Lydia said, pulling out a heavy leather-bound ledger. She flipped through it. It was a record of household accounts. She ran her finger down the columns. Repairs, stable upkeep, kitchen supplies, Dr. Aris, monthly retainer. The sum for Dr. Aris was astronomical. £50 a month. A country doctor made that in a year. Here, Lydia said, pointing. Why are you paying a doctor £600 a year when you are a healthy man of 32? Arthur stared at the ledger. I don't pay him. Timothy handles the accounts. He says it's for preventative care. It's hush money, Lydia said grimly, or payment for services rendered. Arthur, what are the symptoms? Tremors, dilated pupils, heat flashes. Yes. Belladonna, Lydia whispered. Nightshade. In small doses it causes confusion, hallucinations and tremors. It mimics mania. Arthur's face hardened. The weakness vanished, replaced by a cold, terrible fury. They are drugging me at my own table. Yes, Lydia said. And tonight they increased the dose because I was there. They wanted a show. Arthur looked at Lydia. Really looked at her. The transaction protection for wealth had shifted. She had just saved his life, or at least his sanity. You are clever, Lydia Hastings, he said softly. I read a lot, she replied, closing the ledger. And I have a low tolerance for bullies. Arthur walked over to her. He was still pale, but he stood tall. He reached out and touched her cheek. His fingers were cool now. We have a problem, he said. If we stop the poison, they will know we know. They will try something more drastic. A fall down the stairs. A hunting accident. So we don't stop it, Lydia said, her mind working fast. We fake it. You continue to have episodes, but only when they are watching. Meanwhile, you stop taking anything they give you. You eat only what I prepare. I will secure the kitchen. You would become my food taster, Arthur asked, a wry smile touching his lips. I will become your shield, Lydia corrected, echoing his words from the carriage. "But I have a condition. Anything." "The silver comb," Lydia said. "The one Geoffrey stole. I want it found. I want my name cleared in the village. I will not be a duchess who is thought to be a thief." Arthur nodded solemnly. "Done. But Lydia, there is something you must see. If we are to fight this war together, you need to know the full extent of what is hidden in this house." He walked to a bookshelf and pulled on a specific volume. The History of the Roman Empire. The bookcase clicked and swung open. A secret passage. "Where does it go?" Lydia asked. "To the cellars," Arthur said, "where my father really died. It wasn't under the oak. He was dragged there after." Lydia felt a chill. "Arthur, why are you showing me this?" "Because," Arthur said, stepping into the darkness and holding his hand out to her. "The ledger you found is just the beginning. The real fortune of Ashbourne isn't in the bank. It's down here. And it's the reason my uncle is willing to kill us both." Lydia hesitated for only a heartbeat. Then she took his hand and stepped into the dark. The passage was narrow, smelling of wet earth and centuries of decay. Arthur held the lantern high, the flickering light casting long, skeletal shadows against the rough-hewn stone walls. The air grew colder with every step they descended, a stark contrast to the stifling heat of the dining room above. Lydia held her skirts high to avoid the damp floor. "You said your father died down here," she whispered, her voice echoing slightly. "But the official report said he fell from his horse." "The official report was written by Uncle Timothy," Arthur replied, his voice devoid of emotion. "My father was a man of conscience, Lydia. That is a dangerous thing to be in the Sterling family." They reached the bottom of the spiral stairs. Before them stood a heavy iron door, rusted at the hinges, but reinforced with new shiny bolts. Arthur pulled a key from a chain around his neck, a key he evidently kept against his skin at all times. "What is behind this door changes the definition of wealth," Arthur said. He turned the key. The mechanism groaned a sound like a dying beast, and he pushed the door open. Lydia stepped inside and gasped. It was not a dungeon. It was a vault. The room was lined with shelves, and on those shelves sat wooden crates, stamped with the insignia of the East India Company. But the crates had been pried open, revealing their contents. Gold. Not coins, but solid bars, rough, imperfectly cast ingots that glowed with a dull, heavy luster in the lantern light. There were piles of them, millions of pounds worth of gold, sitting in the damp cellar of a Derbyshire estate. "This?" Lydia reached out her fingers, hovering over a bar. "This is a king's ransom. Where did it come from?" "Burma," Arthur said, setting the lantern on a crate. 20 years ago. My uncle and my father were stationed there during the annexation. They were tasked with securing the treasury of a local potentate. The official report said the treasury had been looted by rebels before the British arrived. But it wasn't, Lydia realized, looking at the staggering amount of bullion. They took it. Timothy took it, Arthur corrected. He used his connections to smuggle it out on a medical ship, disguised as ballast. My father found out about it only when the crates arrived here at Ashbourne. He wanted to report it. He wanted to return it to the Crown. He told Timothy that he would go to London the next morning to confess everything. Arthur ran a hand over the rough wood of a crate. That night my father fell from his horse. Timothy couldn't move the gold immediately. It was too heavy, too risky. So he buried it down here, waiting for me to die or go mad so he could inherit the estate and launder the money slowly. Lydia looked at Arthur. The shadows under his eyes seemed deeper down here. He wasn't just fighting for a house. He was living on top of a crime scene. So if he has you committed, Lydia said, the horror dawning on her, he becomes the legal guardian of the estate. He gets access to the cellars. He gets the gold. Precisely. Arthur turned to her. He has been poisoning me to make me incompetent. Once I am locked away in an asylum, he will melt this down and sell it piece by piece. He will become the richest man in England, and my father's murder will never be solved. Lydia felt a surge of adrenaline. This was no longer just about a tool or a reference. This was about justice. It was a story of biblical proportions, brother against brother, greed against blood. "We cannot let him win," she said fiercely. Arthur stepped closer to her. The space between them was charged with the electric tension of the storm outside and the danger inside. "I have been fighting this alone for 6 months, Lydia. I have not slept a full night since I returned. I check my food, I check the locks, I listen to the floorboards creak. It is exhausting." For the first time, the imposing Duke looked vulnerable. He looked like a man who was drowning. Without thinking, Lydia reached out and took his hand. It was a breach of protocol, a liberty a governess should never take with a peer. But the rules of society did not apply in this tomb of gold. "You are not alone anymore," she said firmly. "I may not have a title, Arthur, but I know how to manage a household. I know how to watch servants. I know how to count inventory. Timothy is arrogant. He thinks I am a foolish girl he can scare away. We will use that." Arthur looked down at their joined hands. He slowly raised his eyes to hers. The grey turbulence in his gaze settled into something intense and focused. "Why?" he asked softly. "Why would you risk this for a man who kidnapped you from a storm?" "Because," Lydia whispered, "you are the first person in my life who didn't look at me and see a servant. You saw a partner." Arthur's breath hitched. He raised his hand, his thumb grazing her jawline. The touch sent a shockwave through Lydia's body. For a moment, she thought he would kiss her. The air was thick with it, the scent of rain on his clothes, the heat of his body, the silence of the underground. But then a heavy thud echoed from the ceiling above. Footsteps. Arthur pulled back instantly, the mask slamming back into place. "Timothy, he is pacing the library. He suspects something." He extinguished the lantern, plunging them into darkness. "We must go back. Tomorrow is the Hunt Ball. Timothy has insisted we host it to celebrate the engagement. He invited half the county. He plans to humiliate you publicly to prove you are unfit to be a duchess." "Let him try," Lydia said in the dark, her voice trembling not with fear, but with determination. "He won't just try, Lydia." Arthur's voice came from the blackness close to her ear. "He has invited the Halloways." Lydia froze. Mrs. Halloway, the woman who called her a thief. "Then we must be ready," Lydia said, finding Arthur's arm in the dark. "If he wants a show, Your Grace, we shall give him an opera." The Ashbourne ballroom had not seen a party in a decade, but you wouldn't know it by the sheer opulence on display. Crystal chandeliers, scrubbed clean by terrified maids under Lydia's supervision, blazed like captured stars. The velvet drapes were tied back with gold cords, and the orchestra hired from London played a waltz that floated through the air like perfume. Lydia stood at the top of the grand staircase, Arthur by her side. She was no longer the girl in the muddy wool dress. She was a vision. She wore a gown of deep midnight blue silk off the shoulder with long white gloves. Around her neck sat the ashbourne sapphire, a heavy, glittering stone that Arthur had retrieved from the bank vault that morning. It was a statement. "I am the Duchess. Breathe," Arthur murmured, leaning in as if to whisper a sweet nothing. "Remember, Timothy is watching from the alcove. He expects you to trip." "I never trip," Lydia whispered back, a tight smile plastered on her face. "Unless I intend to fall." "That's my girl," Arthur said. "Shall we?" They descended the stairs. The murmur of the crowd died down. Hundreds of eyes turned to them. The local gentry, the curious neighbours, the gossip mongers, they were all here to see the mad Duke and his charity bride. As they reached the floor, Lady Beatrice glided forward like a shark in taffeta. "Arthur," she said, her voice carrying a little too well. "And, Miss Hastings, you look remarkably clean." A titter ran through the nearby group of ladies. "Lady Beatrice," Lydia said, her voice projecting clearly perfected by years of teaching diction. "You look lovely. Is that the same dress you wore to the coronation? How wonderful that you preserve history so faithfully." Arthur choked back a laugh. Beatrice's smile stiffened. The insult was subtle, calling her old and cheap in one breath, but undeniable. "We have special guests," Beatrice said, her eyes flashing with malice. "I believe you know them." The crowd parted. Standing near the buffet table looking smug and self-righteous was Mrs. Halloway, flanked by her son, Geoffrey. Lydia's stomach turned over. Geoffrey looked dashing in a suit he likely hadn't paid for. Mrs. Halloway looked ready for an execution. Arthur squeezed Lydia's hand. "Steady." Mrs. Halloway marched forward, her nose in the air. "Well, well, it seems anyone is allowed into high society these days. Tell me, Duke, do you check the pockets of your guests before they leave, or is your fiancée the only one with sticky fingers?" The ballroom went silent. The music actually stopped. This was the moment Timothy and Beatrice had engineered. The public shaming. Timothy stepped out from the alcove, feigning shock. "Mrs. Halloway." "What is this? Surely you are mistaken." "I am not mistaken," Mrs. Halloway screeched, playing her part with gusto. "That woman was my governess until 3 days ago. I dismissed her for stealing a silver comb from my private vanity. She is a common thief." Whispers erupted like wildfire. Thief. Governess. Scandal. Lydia felt the blood drain from her face, but she felt the weight of the sapphire on her chest. She felt Arthur's solid presence beside her. She remembered the gold in the cellar. She remembered who the real criminals were. She let go of Arthur's hand and took a step forward, isolating herself in the center of the room. "Mrs. Halloway," Lydia said, her voice calm, cutting through the murmurs. "I am glad you are here. I was hoping to return something to you." Mrs. Halloway blinked. "Return what?" "The comb, you admit it." "Oh no," Lydia said, reaching into her small beaded purse. "I do not have the comb, but I do have this." She pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was crumpled and stained with wine. "What is that?" Mrs. Halloway asked, suspicious. "This," Lydia said, unfolding it, "is a promissory note from the Golden Cockerel gambling house in London. It is signed by Mr. Geoffrey Halloway." Geoffrey's face went white. He dropped his glass of punch. It shattered loudly on the parquet floor. Lydia continued reading from the paper. It states that Mr. Halloway owed £300 due last Tuesday. It also includes a note from the pawnbroker on Fleet Street, confirming the receipt of one antique silver comb bearing the Halloway crest in exchange for partial payment. Lydia walked over to Mrs. Halloway and pressed the paper into her hand. I believe Geoffrey stole your comb, madam, and when you discovered it missing, he panicked and blamed the governess because he knew you would believe him over me. I did not steal from you, but your son stole your dignity, Mrs. Halloway stared at the paper. She looked at Geoffrey. Geoffrey was backing away, looking for an exit. Geoffrey, Mrs. Halloway whispered. Is this true? Mother, I can explain. Geoffrey stammered. The crowd gasped. The narrative flipped instantly. Lydia was no longer the thief. She was the wronged martyr. The Halloways were the disgrace. I believe, Arthur's voice boomed, stepping up beside Lydia, that an apology is in order, or perhaps an exit. Mrs. Halloway turned purple. She slapped Geoffrey across the face with her fan, a sharp crack that echoed through the room and stormed out. Geoffrey scurried after her like a beaten dog. The silence stretched for a second, and then a lone applause started, then another. Soon the room was clapping, not for the Halloways, but for the performance, for Lydia. Lydia turned to look at Uncle Timothy. He was standing by a pillar, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. He had lost this round. Badly. Shall we dance, my love? Arthur asked, offering his hand. Lydia took it. We shall. As the music swelled and Arthur swept her onto the floor, he pulled her close. That was magnificent, he whispered against her hair. You destroyed them without raising your voice. I told you, Lydia said, feeling a rush of power. I don't like bullies. Timothy is leaving. Arthur noted, spinning her so he could see the door. He is going to the library. He's rattled. Good, Lydia said. Let him run. No. Arthur said, his grip tightening on her waist. He isn't running. He's escalating. Look at the balcony. Lydia looked up. Standing on the mezzanine watching them was a man Lydia had never seen before. He was dressed in a dark suit, but he didn't look like a guest. He had a scar running down his cheek and the dead eyes of a man who killed for a living. Who is that? Lydia asked, her heart skipping a beat. That, Arthur said grimly, is Caleb Thorne, the man my uncle uses when lawsuits and rumors fail. He just arrived from London. The waltz ended. Arthur didn't let go of her hand. The game has changed, Lydia. Timothy isn't trying to ruin my reputation anymore. He called Thorne. That means he intends to kill me tonight. Tonight? Lydia gasped. Yes, Arthur said, leading her off the floor away from the prying eyes toward the conservatory doors. We have to leave. Now. If we stay in the main house, we are sitting ducks. We need to get to the stables. But the guests are our cover, Arthur said. Smile, Lydia. Keep smiling. We are just a happy couple stealing a moment in the garden. But the moment we are out of sight, we run. They stepped out into the cool night air of the conservatory. The moment the glass doors closed behind them, Arthur dropped the act. He grabbed her hand and pulled her into the shadows of the exotic plants. Take off your shoes, he ordered. My shoes? You can't run in heels, he said, kicking off his own dress shoes. And we need to be silent. Lydia unbuckled her silk slippers and left them under a fern. She was barefoot in her silk gown, standing in the dirt with a duke. Where are we going? She asked. To the old oak, Arthur said. It's the only place on the estate Timothy doesn't watch, because he thinks it's just a tree. But there is something inside the trunk I didn't show you. What? A rifle, Arthur said. And 2 horses. They ran. Barefoot and breathless, Lydia and Arthur tore across the wet lawn, the cold mud seeping between their toes. The storm had passed, leaving a bright accusatory moon that illuminated the sentinel, the old oak looming ahead like a jagged guardian. "They are close," Lydia cried, hearing the heavy crunch of boots on gravel behind them. "Keep running to the trunk," Arthur commanded, pulling her faster. They reached the massive tree. Arthur didn't reach for a hollow in the wood. Instead, he dropped to his knees at the base of the roots, frantically brushing away loose soil to reveal a hidden iron latch. A gunshot cracked the night air. Bark exploded just inches from Arthur's head. Lydia screamed, throwing herself down. Caleb Thorne strolled out of the mist, a smoking pistol in hand, walking with the terrifying calm of a man who enjoyed his work. Uncle Timothy followed, wheezing, his face purple with exertion and triumph. Nowhere left to run. "Nephew," Timothy sneered, stepping into the moonlight. "A tragic suicide pact. The mad duke and his thief mistress found dead under the cursed family tree. Poetic, isn't it?" Thorne raised the gun, aiming directly at Arthur's chest. "Wait!" Lydia screamed, standing up and stepping in front of Arthur. Her heart was hammering a frantic rhythm, but her voice was clear. "If you kill him, you lose the gold." Timothy signaled Thorne to pause. "What did you say?" "We moved it." Lydia lied, her eyes locking onto Timothy's greedy gaze. "While you were dressing for the ball, the cellar is empty. We used the service tunnels. Only I know where the bullion is buried now. Kill us, and you inherit nothing but a bankrupt estate and a murder charge." Timothy's eyes bulged with panic. Greed was his only weakness. "You lie. Check the mud on Arthur's hands," Lydia countered, pointing to the dirt Arthur had just scraped from the latch. "Why do you think we came here to hide? No. We came to check the new vault." Timothy shoved past Thorne, looking frantically at the disturbed earth near the roots. "Where is it?" "Show me." It was the distraction Arthur needed. He didn't have a rifle. He was the weapon. Utilizing the combat training from his years in the colonies, Arthur lunged. He tackled Thorne with the force of a battering ram. The pistol skittered across the wet grass, disappearing into the dark brush. Thorne was strong, but Arthur was fighting for his life. He delivered a brutal, bone-shattering right hook that knocked the assassin backward into the trunk of the oak. Thorne slid down unconscious. Timothy turned, terrified, realizing his protection was gone. He tried to scramble away, but Lydia was faster. She snatched up a heavy, fallen branch, wielding it like a club. "Sit down, my lord," she commanded, her voice steel. Timothy froze, trembling. "Lydia, please, we can share it. Half, I'll give you half." "I don't want your stolen gold," Lydia spat. "I want your name on a confession." Suddenly, beams of light swept across the field. A carriage and 2 police wagons came tearing over the ridge. Arthur stood up, wiping blood from his lip. "You were right, Uncle. I am crazy. Crazy enough to invite the chief constable to wait in the stables." The trap hadn't been the tree. The trap was the escape. Arthur had arranged for the authorities to witness the pursuit. As the police hauled a screaming Timothy away, Arthur turned to Lydia. He was bruised, muddy, and breathing hard. The adrenaline was fading, leaving only the raw intensity of the moment. "You said you moved the gold," Arthur said, a smirk playing on his lips. "I lied." Lydia smiled, dropping the branch. "I told you, Your Grace, I'm a very good actress." Arthur closed the distance between them. Under the canopy of the old oak, where her ruin had begun, her new life truly started. He didn't ask for permission this time. He took her face in his hands and kissed her a searing, desperate kiss that tasted of rain, danger, and victory. "I don't care about the gold," Arthur whispered against her lips as he pulled her into an embrace that promised he would never let go. "I have the only treasure that matters." And that is how a storm, a stolen comb, and a single oak tree brought down an empire of greed. Lydia Hastings didn't just survive the rain. She became the storm that cleaned Ashbourne Hall. If you loved this story of justice, romance, and high-stakes revenge, please hit that like button. It really helps us bring more stories to life. Did you suspect the uncle was behind the poison? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss the next part of our saga. Share this video with a friend who needs a reminder that sometimes when you lose everything, you're actually being positioned for something greater. Thanks for watching.